because I thought it would be nice for to see the picture on camera. We can.
The first reaction I had was a great surprise, really. I had to ask them to repeat what they had just said, so I could properly make sure I could hear it. I became a Christian probably in my teenage years, and so I had a sense from then that I probably wanted to do something that was about living that Christian faith out. And of course, at that time, women weren't ordained in the church, so that wasn't anything that ever entered my head. And so being a nurse was a vocation. At first I did think about becoming a doctor, and this may offend doctors now, but I had a sense that actually nurses provided much more holistic care. They were often with patients for longer periods of time, sometimes in those difficult moments. So therefore chose to become a nurse and to take one of the very early degrees in nursing. And I was at the Nightingale School of Nursing and the South Bank Poly to do that. So growing up, we went to church regularly, not always with my parents. My grandparents took us. So we all went to church, and I joined a youth group. And during the confirmation preparation, Steve, who was a friend of mine, asked me, have you made a personal commitment to follow Christ? And I thought, well, I'm not sure that I have done that. So in that moment, we prayed, and that was a sense of which actually it wasn't my family's faith, it wasn't the church's faith, this was my faith. I chose in that moment that I would follow Jesus. And actually we shouldn't underestimate the power of teenage people asking each other about faith. And it was through, I became a Christian through a teenager, somebody asking me a very simple question. So for me, a personal commitment was that moment that you say, well, actually, I want to follow Jesus. I want him in my life, and I recognise that in a sense my relationship with God was through what Christ had done in the past, through his death, resurrection, which it points to a future that's without death and sin, but for that journey that we have on this life, journeying with him and in shaping my life by him and in prayer and study of scripture, that for me was the moment of change. When I moved from being full-time in the Department of Health, I'm to move in the church. We'd just been to Slovenia on a holiday, and I'm not very adventurous, but one of the things we did with my children was canyoning. And canyoning is when you go up this beautiful mountain, but you come down via the waterfalls. And I went up, and I had done all the check on the company. They gave me the sort of hard hat and the life preserver, and I walked up with this chap, and I checked, and I thought he was, he's going to we were safe in his hands. And so you walk up, and at some point you have to go down. You have to take that step down this slide. And for me, in a sense, I did all the head stuff. I did all of that. But at some point, I think as a Christian, you have to take that step off and put your faith in Jesus Christ. And so you step off and go down what is like a huge water flume. And the truth is, for me, in a sense, my Christian life is a bit like that. There's those moments that are great and exhilarating, but with canyoning, you then drop off into this pool of water, and at some moment you feel like you could be drowning. And actually, that's a bit what faith is like. There are moments where you think, oh my goodness, but because you've taken that step of belief, because you've put your faith in God, you pop up and you're all right, and it's okay. Yeah, people often ask me, what is it like to have two careers? Well, the truth is I've had one vocation, and that was to follow Jesus Christ, and therefore living out my faith and what I believe. I did initially in nursing. It was about, so in a sense, it was that sense of, you can be the hands of Christ to people by that caring. And I think for me, nursing was about being able to offer compassion and care to people. Meeting people who aren't always in the place that they want to be in their lives. And so how do you offer compassion? How do you reassure? How do you give clear information? So in a sense, they can manage whatever else is going on. And so for me, it was a huge privilege being a nurse, because you meet all sorts of different places. You're with people in very difficult moments, and so in a sense for me that was it was living out my faith, but it was also something that was about compassion. I'm the bishop I am because I was a nurse, and therefore I'm going to be the archbishop that I am because I was a nurse. And for me the real gifts that has given me, one is this ability to be with people and to listen to them and to talk to them and to be in those places that are often quite difficult, and that for me has been a real gift. And therefore I carry that forward and that compassion forward. But then as I travelled slightly more into other more senior roles, latterly being the government's chief nursing officer for England, that was a really good opportunity, one, to work out how you live out your Christian faith. So a lot of my theology I did there. How do you live out a Christian in what is a very very fast-moving environment, often political around the edges. So you work out, what does it look like to be a Christian in those moments. But also, the Department of Health and the NHS is a pretty complex organisation. I didn't manage 420,000 nurses. I led them, I oversaw them. So that sort of skill of overseeing complexity was something that I could take into being a bishop. And so for me, that is, those are some of the things that I really feel that I can bring into the role as a bishop and then as an archbishop. And right the way through from the very beginning, that I've always worked with other people. I've always worked with teams. I know no other way of doing it. And therefore, as an archbishop, my ministry is always shared. And therefore, bringing that ability to create teams and healthy environments. There's a wonderful African proverb that said, if you want to go fast, you go alone, but if you want to go far, you go together. And so, that ability to work with teams and to go far together is something that has completely shaped me. But when I began the process that the church works out whether you should go and train to be a priest, it had always been my intention to going full-time into training and into full-time to be a priest. But as I began the process for training, in fact, I was asked whether I would apply to be the government's chief nursing officer. So in a sense, that became a moment where, again, of saying, is this something that that God wants me to do? Is it something that I've got the skills and the experience to do? And so therefore, I then, I was training part-time anyway, but it then became apparent as I became the government's chief nursing officer, I would become a self-supporting minister. It wouldn't be my full-time ministry. And I think that having been in the Department of Health for 5 years, having been ordained for a couple, I suppose the question for me was, if I believed in the church and I believed in God, was actually, do I use my skills and experience still in the health service and the NHS, or do I begin to use those in the church? And so for me, that became a stronger desire that I would use my skills, my gifting, the things that God had given me full-time in the church. And therefore, to say, that probably was the hardest decision that I've made in my life, because my whole experience was changing. And but I did. I said, okay, that's what I'll do. I'll make that move into the church. And the truth is, there are occasions I'm frustrated with the Church of England, but I don't regret that at all. I mean, for me, that I don't regret that at all. And so this was the first time that I put my nurse's uniform on. The first reaction I had was a great surprise, really. I had to ask them to repeat what they had just said, so I could properly make sure I could hear it. And there is a sense of real excitement about it, and it is that sense in any process that takes you down a route for something like this. You're obviously always asking yourself, and of course there's prayer, and of course there's listening to God, but it's about saying, do I see myself? Do I think I have something to offer for it? And so therefore, when the call came through, apart from being surprised and excited, there was a sense of peace, because actually in the role that they're looking for at this moment, the Church of England and the Anglican Communion at this time, I do feel that God has given me experience and opportunities to be able to offer something in the service of the Anglican Communion and of the Diocese of Canterbury and the Church of England. I'm going to say I'm really fortunate that my family are really supportive. That's not always straightforward, because actually sometimes it's better that they were more critical about your decisions and your choices. But they are clearly very supportive of me. It is also fair to say that they recognise the weight of the office and also some of the challenges that church faces, and therefore they are also concerned for me in terms of going into this role. But I know that they will be there for me. it is the working out of a decision that was made 30 years ago to ordain women. And I'm really grateful for all those that at that time did that work to bring about that change in the Church of England. I walk in the footsteps of those that have gone before me. But also it is important because it says something. It says something to the world about the church, and also it says something to women. I often, at the moment of the Bishop of London, will go into a classroom in which have men and women students in there, and what I watch is when I talk about what I'm doing and where I am, people will sit up and listen, and what it does is, they don't want to become the Bishop of London or the Archbishop of Canterbury, or they might, but I don't think they do. But for a lot of people, they say, well, I see somebody like me. And therefore it enables them to think, well, actually, maybe I can imagine. I can imagine that my dreams, could be possible. And it would be, it's interesting to think back to my 16-year-old self that at the time didn't consider ministry because the women were not being ordained, and how much that world's changed, and that possibility to do it. It is still the case that there are those that will have an understanding of Scripture and their faith, which therefore for them women can't be ordained. And that is the settled position of the Church of England. There are less and less provinces in the Anglican Communion that would hold that position, but there still are some. And I think having been a woman in the Diocese of London, probably the most diverse theologically within it, that I think I have learnt a way in which I can work with those who don't agree that I'm either a bishop or a priest in a way that is respectful. And I think that potentially is a gift to the world. How do you work? How do you work and have a mutuality when actually you have a fundamental disagreement, and you do that in a way that is both positive and constructive? Alongside that, I'm absolutely clear that I will speak against misogyny, and things that will discriminate against women in an environment they should not be discriminated against. And I recognise that will be hard for some people, but as I say, I think it may well be a gift to the world. As a Christian, in terms of modelling what we do on Christ, Christ clearly sat alongside people, along the vulnerable and those that are sometimes voiceless. And there is this, one of our motivations is to give voice to the voiceless, but sometimes actually you need to be giving them the voice. Not least, there's something about empowering others in there. So there is something about we always have to hold our power carefully. And whilst it's absolutely right to use our agency at times, sometimes the agency is not to speak up on behalf of others, it's to enable them to have their voice and to then bring people into that environment where they can speak and people can hear from them directly. And of course, that's the basis of a lot of our, community empowering organisations, of which the Church works often hand in hand with. I often talk about, in a sense, God being for me that stronghold, that fortress, that place of safety, and the Church is called to reflect God. So they should be that place, that stronghold, that place of safety for people. But also we are called to care for the vulnerable and the marginalised. And therefore, at the heart of our gospel and the heart of what Christ is calling us to do is to make church a safer place, safe for those people to be in. And therefore it is really important that we have been building our safeguarding processes. We have been making it a safer place. We've been involving survivors and victims of abuse in what we're doing, and we need to continue to do that. Well, one of the real joys of the Anglican Communion is that there are churches in all sorts of communities, and the Anglican Communion, we're a family. And there is this order of liturgy and of prayers and of scriptures that are said in this hugely diverse communities, but we're linked together with this common history, and that for me is a real privilege to be able to see the way the Church in these local communities not only speak of God but actually also attend their community and transform unjust structures. And actually what I hope to do is to be able to enable them to build on the confidence that they've got in the gospel and continue to do that going forward.